The radio would not stop crackling. Every few seconds, another call came in from the perimeter, another simulated breach, another pressure point tightening around us. We were boxed inside a rural training compound near Redstone Range in northern Alabama, 90 personnel holding what was supposed to be a controlled exercise. It stopped feeling controlled sometime before sunrise. I was standing inside the command trailer when the visiting Army colonel stepped in. He scanned the room, saw the map, saw the tension, then his eyes landed on me. "This is your sniper?" he asked. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. A few men near the back let out quiet laughs, not cruel, just certain. I did not answer him. I picked up my rifle and stepped out into the damp Alabama morning. The air smelled like pine and red clay. I moved to the overwatch berm, settled into position, and let the noise fade behind me. One slow breath in, one steady breath out. Through the scope, I found the first leadership target coordinating the siege. Respect is not demanded. It is demonstrated. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It was the summer of 2016, and I was 32 years old, standing in a position I had spent most of my career fighting to earn. My name is Lieutenant Harper Callahan. I was assigned to Naval Special Warfare and temporarily attached to a joint readiness evaluation at Redstone Range in northern Alabama. It was not a combat deployment. It was not overseas. It was a stateside training evolution designed to test coordination between Navy Special Operators and an Army National Guard infantry battalion rotating through advanced readiness certification. On paper, it looked routine. In reality, nothing about it felt routine after the first 12 hours. The scenario simulated an insurgent siege against a small forward operating compound, 90 personnel inside the wire, opposing force role players positioned in surrounding wooded ridgelines. Limited simulated ammunition, restricted communications, no external support unless approved by evaluators. Colonel Mark Hensley had been assigned as senior Army observer, decorated, experienced, not hostile, just traditional. He had made it clear during the initial brief that he believed leadership during a containment scenario required physical presence and hardened instincts. The way he said it made the meaning obvious. He did not believe I had either. I had dealt with that tone before. The careful phrasing, the professional skepticism that carried something heavier underneath it. The first day of the exercise went according to plan. Controlled probing attacks, measured response, communication drills, cross-unit coordination. Then the opposing force adjusted faster than expected. By late afternoon, they had maneuvered through swamp terrain our analysts had labeled low risk. They secured a narrow, elevated ridgeline overlooking our eastern sector. From that position, they simulated indirect fire coordination and forced us into defensive compression. Under normal circumstances, evaluators would pause the scenario and debrief weaknesses. Colonel Hensley chose not to. "Fight it through," he said. "Real world does not reset." By nightfall, we were boxed in. Simulated casualty tags were issued. Communications antennas were marked as disabled under exercise rules. Ammunition allotments were reduced to reflect extended engagement. Inside the perimeter, tension changed shape. It was no longer energetic. It became tight. Squad leaders lowered their voices. Movements became deliberate. Nobody wasted words. I walked the perimeter twice that night, checking positions, listening more than speaking. Sergeant Eli Warren, my senior enlisted advisor, stayed half a step behind me the entire time. He did not question my decisions. He did not need to, but I could feel the strain inside the Army squads. They were not questioning the plan. They were questioning me. At 0530 the following morning, opposing force elements captured the western rise as well. That placed them on two elevated positions with line of sight over most of our perimeter. Under exercise control rules, we were not allowed to air insert reinforcements or magically resupply. We had to solve the problem from inside. Inside the command trailer, the map was layered with grease pencil markings, red arrows, blue defensive arcs, estimated movement corridors. Colonel Hensley stood beside the operations table, watching every decision. He never raised his voice. He did not need to. His doubt was quieter than that. And the men around him noticed. Morale does not collapse all at once. It thins. It stretches. It begins to fray at the edges when leaders hesitate. I understood something in that moment that had nothing to do with the exercise. If I failed there, it would not be framed as a tactical miscalculation. It would be framed as confirmation. Confirmation that the woman in command had been a risk. That weight does not make you emotional. It makes you precise. I studied the opposing force movement patterns again. They were not attacking blindly. They were being directed, timed, coordinated from specific vantage points. Remove coordination and pressure fractures. I leaned over the map and circled 4 positions. Communications lead on the eastern ridge. Mortar simulation coordinator on the west. 2 maneuver controllers rotating between tree lines near the northern depression. 4 nodes. 4 sources of structure. Without them, numbers mean less. I straightened, exhaled slowly, and tapped the map once. "This is where we take it back," I said. And for the first time that morning, the room went quiet for a different reason. By the second morning, the exercises stripped away anything comfortable. Under simulation rules, our ammunition counts were capped. Once you exceeded your allotment, you were tagged out. Water resupply was restricted to mimic isolation. 2 of our communications towers had been ruled eliminated overnight by opposing force infiltration teams. We were operating on limited internal channels, no long-range coordination, no external support. It was still training, but it no longer felt safe. Inside the perimeter, fatigue began to show in small ways. Helmets sat slightly crooked, gloves stayed on longer than necessary. Conversations grew shorter. Army squad leaders from the National Guard element gathered near the command trailer after a perimeter brief, speaking in low voices they assumed I could not hear. Frustration was not directed at the enemy. It was directed at uncertainty. One of them said it quietly, not cruelly. "Maybe we should let one of our guys take overwatch." The words were not meant for me, but I heard them. I did not turn around. I did not correct him. I did not let my shoulders tighten or my jaw set. Emotion in leadership is contagious. If I reacted, the narrative would shift from tactics to pride. Instead, I walked back to the operations table and studied the map again. The opposing force was not attacking randomly. They were moving in cycles. 20-minute pressure waves followed by 15-minute reposition windows. Their maneuver elements advanced only after specific radio cues. Suppression fire simulations aligned with hand signal relays from elevated ground. That meant structure. Structure means leadership. And leadership, when removed, creates hesitation. I watched through binoculars from the eastern sandbag wall for nearly 40 minutes without speaking. Sergeant Eli Warren joined me quietly, adjusting the spotting scope. "They're disciplined," he said. "They're directed," I answered. That was the difference. My mind began sorting patterns the way it always did under stress. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just reduction of chaos into sequence. The communications coordinator stood on the eastern ridge slightly longer than others between signal relays. The mortar simulation leader on the western slope stepped into partial exposure every time he adjusted position. 2 maneuver leads crossed the northern tree line in predictable arcs to confirm flanking routes. 4 pressure points. Remove them, and the rest would pause. Pause creates opportunity. But the risk was obvious. Taking an overwatch position would expose the shooter to countermaneuver. The opposing force had already demonstrated counter-sniper awareness during earlier drills. Blank rounds or not, sustained suppression under exercise rules could rule a shooter ineffective quickly. Failure would not just remove me from the board, it would validate every doubt already forming in the room. I stepped back into the trailer and felt eyes track me. Colonel Mark Hensley stood near the map, arms folded, observing without comment. The Army squad leaders were tense. They wanted decisive action. They also wanted reassurance. I gave them neither. "I've identified 4 command nodes controlling their movement," I said evenly. "Remove those, and the rest lose synchronization." Silence. One of the squad leaders shifted his weight. "With respect, ma'am," he began carefully, "that's going to require clean, long-range work under pressure." "I'm aware," I said. There it was again, the doubt. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. I let it sit in the room. Then I made the decision. I'll take Overwatch. No emphasis. No declaration. Just fact. Colonel Hensley studied me for a long moment. His face revealed nothing, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He understood what was at stake, not just tactically, institutionally. If you're exposed, he said slowly, we lose our command element. If we do nothing, I answered, we lose the perimeter. The room held still. He exhaled once through his nose and nodded slightly. You have one shot to prove this works, he said. It was not literal. It was heavier than that. I picked up my rifle, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped toward the exit. Outside, the Alabama air was already warming. The ridgelines were quiet for the moment. 4 targets, 4 targets, 4 chances, and no margin for ego. I moved before sunrise because hesitation grows in daylight. The eastern sky was just beginning to turn gray when Sergeant Eli Warren and I crawled into position along the northern berm. It was not high ground in the dramatic sense, just a reinforced dirt rise overlooking the shallow valley where the opposing force had established their rotating leadership points. The air was damp and cool. Pine needles stuck to my sleeves as I settled behind the rifle. Warren slid in beside me, quiet as always. He adjusted the spotting scope and checked the sector boundaries one more time. Wind's light, he said softly. Left to right. I nodded. Behind us, inside the perimeter, the compound was awake but restrained. Boots moved. Radios murmured. No one was speaking loudly. Colonel Mark Hensley stood near the command trailer with binoculars pressed to his eyes. I could feel him watching, not just the valley, but me. The first target stepped into view at 6:11 in the morning. Communications coordinator. Elevated position on the eastern ridgeline. He was relaying maneuver updates using hand signals to 2 flanking elements below him. Every time he completed a signal, he stayed exposed for just a few seconds longer than necessary. Confidence does that. Under the exercise parameters, the distance was within acceptable range. Challenging, but not theatrical. If this had been real, it would have been well within capability. Warren adjusted the scope slightly. Clear lane, he whispered. I did not answer. Breath in, breath out. The rifle settled into the pocket of my shoulder like it belonged there. My world narrowed to reticle and movement. The rest of the noise fell away. No anger, no urge to prove anything. Just calculation. The reticle hovered center mass. I tracked the slight shift of his stance as he leaned to gesture again. Pause. The moment stretched. Then I pressed. The shot cracked across the valley, sharp even with blanks. The echo rolled once against the trees and faded. Through the scope, I saw the target freeze. Under exercise protocol, when tagged, you immediately signal elimination. He stood upright, pulled the bright orange vest from his pouch, and held it high before walking down the ridge. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the radio chatter below him spiked. Warren adjusted the spotting scope. They're scrambling, he said. 2 maneuver elements hesitated mid-advance. A suppression team lowered their simulated firing posture. Confusion rippled outward in subtle but visible waves. Leadership removal is not dramatic. It is destabilizing. Inside the compound, I heard someone exhale audibly over the open radio channel. Colonel Hensley was speaking into a handset, beginning to issue a commentary to the evaluation staff. And that's... He stopped, mid-sentence. Because he had expected adjustment. He had not expected immediate fracture. I did not look back to see his expression. I was already searching for the second node. The first shot bought us disruption. The second needed to buy us space. The mortar simulation laid on the western slope had been the one coordinating pressure against our southern barrier. Every few minutes he stepped into partial view to adjust imaginary fire corrections, calling out grid references over a handheld radio. Without the communications coordinator, he hesitated longer between adjustments. He was waiting for confirmation that never came. Warren tracked him through the spotting scope. Western Ridge, 12 o'clock from your last impact, he said quietly. He's unsettled. Unsettled meant exposed. I shifted my body slightly, redistributing weight against the berm. The angle was tighter from this position, and the valley light was stronger now, turning the ridgeline into sharp contrast. Breath steady, reticle steady. The mortar lad leaned forward to gesture toward the southern tree line. I pressed. The second report cut through the morning air. He flinched, paused, then raised the orange vest high above his head. The mortar simulation ended instantly. The opposing squad beneath him froze, unsure whether to continue the push or hold position. Inside our perimeter, the Southern Barrier team let out a brief cheer before catching themselves. Momentum was shifting, but pressure rarely retreats quietly. The opposing force responded faster this time. Within seconds, two squads began aggressive movement toward our general sector. Not direct assault. Search pattern? They were narrowing angles, looking for the source of the shots. Contact elements spreading north, Horn said. They're triangulating. I slid back from the rifle and crawled laterally 5 yards along the berm. The reposition was not dramatic, just enough to break pattern. Warren mirrored the move, keeping low. Blank suppression fire cracked toward our original position seconds later. The sound was sharp and chaotic, dirt kicking up where we had been lying. Even in training, sustained suppression tightens your chest. Your body does not fully distinguish between simulation and consequence. Warren adjusted the scope again. They're guessing, he said. No clean line. I settled into the new position. The third leadership node moved through the northern tree line at predictable intervals, signaling flanking attempts. He had not yet realized two command elements were gone. Timing is everything in a maneuver. If timing collapses, coordination follows. He stepped out of cover to gesture toward a repositioning squad. I did not rush it. Breath in, breath out, press. The third shot echoed, slightly flatter in tone due to the shifting wind. The target halted, looked down at his chest, then raised the orange vest with visible frustration. His flanking element stalled immediately, unsure whether to advance without direction. The valley changed tone again. What had been organized pressure now felt reactive, but reaction can turn dangerous. The opposing force intensified their search. Suppression fire moved in disciplined arcs across the berm. Dirt and pine needles sprayed across my sleeves. A round cracked closer than before, forcing Warren to duck instinctively. He shifted too high for a moment. A blank round struck near his shoulder, marking him under exercise rules. He froze. Tagged? I asked, without looking away from the valley. He checked his vest. Negative, he said. Close. We both understood how narrow that margin was. I repositioned again, crawling farther down the berm toward a shallow depression. The movement cost time, but staying predictable costs more. Inside the compound, I heard radio traffic spike. Army squad leaders adjusting defensive arcs as the opposing force pushed outward in frustration. The suppression fire increased in tempo. It would have been easy to rush the final shot. Easy to chase completion instead of precision, but discipline is not speed, it is restraint. I scanned the valley slowly, ignoring the noise around me. 3 leadership nodes removed. 1 remained. The opposing field commander had stayed back until now, observing from partial cover near the central ridgeline. He had not exposed himself during the previous engagements. He was waiting, smart. He knew something was wrong. He began moving laterally, adjusting positions of remaining squads, trying to restore order. His posture was different from the others, less reactive, more controlled. That made him the most important removal. Suppression fire thinned as the opposing force realized they were shooting at uncertainty. Confusion was spreading through their ranks, but without eliminating him they could still recover. Warren steadied the spotting scope. There, he said quietly. Central ridge, moving between 2 pine clusters. I tracked the motion through the reticle. Calm returned. Not because pressure disappeared, because clarity replaced it. 1 leadership element remained. The opposing field commander. The field commander did not move like the others. He did not linger in the open. He did not repeat patterns. He adjusted his pace every time he crossed a gap between trees, sometimes slowing, sometimes stopping mid-stride, as if testing whether he was being watched. He was not guessing anymore. He knew. Warren tracked him through the scope and let out a quiet breath. He's hunting back. I could see it too. Instead of stepping into clean lanes to direct his teams, he remained half-concealed, using hand signals from behind cover. He forced his squads to move closer before giving instruction. Every correction minimized his exposure window. He was anticipating a counter-sniper. Me. Blank suppression fire continued intermittently toward the berm, but it had lost rhythm. The opposing force was no longer coordinated enough to commit to a full push. They were waiting for him to stabilize the situation. If he did, the pressure would return all at once. I kept the reticle on the gap between two tall pines where he had crossed twice before. He did not cross again. Minutes stretched. Training time feels longer under a scope. Every second carries weight. The longer I held position without taking the shot, the more the valley felt like it was holding its breath. Inside the perimeter, radio chatter quieted. Everyone knew what remained. Colonel Mark Hensley's voice cut in low over the command channel. "If you miss," he said evenly, "we collapse." There was no threat in his tone, just calculation. He was right. 3 leadership removals had fractured the opposing force, but a single decisive countermaneuver directed by their field commander could reassemble them. If I exposed myself with a rush shot and failed, they would identify my position. Under exercise rules, sustained suppression would eliminate me. Without overwatch, our perimeter would be vulnerable. Failure would not just be tactical, it would be symbolic. I felt the weight of that sentence settle into my shoulders. If you miss, we collapse. Doubt does not announce itself loudly. It slips in quietly, asking whether you have already pushed too far, whether patience has become hesitation. The field commander shifted positions again, staying low. He stopped once, crouched, then redirected a squad with a quick circular motion of his hand. He was adapting faster than I expected. Warren adjusted the spotting scope. "He's shortening his exposure windows," he murmured. "I see it." My trigger finger rested outside the guard. I did not rush it inside. Breath in, breath out. The valley light was fully up now, flattening shadows and making concealment thinner. Sweat traced down my spine beneath my plate carrier. My cheek remained pressed against the stock, steady despite the growing tension. The urge to take a marginal shot flickered once. Ignore it. Speed proves nothing. Precision ends things. The commander moved again, this time stepping farther than before, then stopping abruptly as if reconsidering. He leaned slightly out from behind the pine cluster to assess his remaining squads. He was looking for confirmation that his structure still held. It did not, but he had not accepted that yet. Colonel Hensley's breathing was faintly audible over the open channel. He was watching through binoculars. So was everyone else who could find an angle. No one spoke. The field commander shifted his weight forward, one foot planted, torso angled. His posture changed from motion to evaluation. Not running, not directing, thinking. That was the moment. In that slight hesitation, when command turns inward before it turns outward, exposure lengthens just enough. Through the scope, I saw it, the smallest pause in his movement, and I knew the window had opened. I did not rush the trigger. The hesitation in his posture held for less than a second, but it was enough. Breath in, breath out. The reticle settled center mass. Press. The 4th report cracked across the valley, sharper in the full morning light. It rolled once against the tree line and dissolved into the humid Alabama air. Through the scope, I saw the field commander freeze. He looked down briefly, as if verifying what he already knew. Then he reached into his vest pouch and raised the orange marker high above his head. No drama, no collapse, just acknowledgement. He stepped out from behind the pine cluster and walked downhill toward the exercise boundary line. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then everything changed. The squads that had been moving under his direction stalled mid-stride. One element attempted to reposition, then stopped when no hand signal followed. A suppression team that had been firing in disciplined bursts lowered their rifles uncertainly. Radio chatter spiked, then fragmented. Without their communications coordinator, mortar-led, maneuver controller, and now their field commander, the opposing force had numbers but no spine. Confusion spread quietly but completely. Inside our perimeter, someone exhaled audibly over the radio. Another voice said, "They're pulling back." The valley that had felt compressed and tense for nearly 2 days began to loosen. Not dramatically, gradually, like a tightened fist opening. Then the loudspeaker crackled from the evaluation tower. End exercise, all elements hold position." The words echoed flat across the range. Silence followed, not the silence of fear, the silence of recalibration. Opposing force personnel began walking down from their positions, orange markers visible against their uniforms. Our perimeter teams remained at post until given secondary confirmation. Discipline does not disappear with a whistle. I lifted my cheek from the stock and let the rifle settle against the berm. My heartbeat was steady. My hands were steady. Warren let out a breath he had been holding. 4 clean removals, he said quietly. I did not respond. Across the compound, men began removing helmets, stretching shoulders, adjusting gloves. There was no cheering, no celebration, just the quiet release that comes when pressure lifts. I turned slightly and saw Colonel Mark Hensley standing near the command trailer. He lowered his binoculars slowly, almost deliberately, as if setting down something heavier than glass and metal. There was no laughter now, no sidelong glances. The Army squad leaders who had questioned Overwatch earlier met my eyes briefly as I stood. One of them gave a small nod. Not exaggerated, not performative, just acknowledgement. Respect in the military rarely comes with applause. It comes with stillness. I rose carefully and slung the rifle across my back. The berm felt less like a firing position now and more like a piece of dirt again. As I walked back toward the command trailer, boots crunching lightly over pine needles, conversations softened around me, not because people were avoiding me, because they were reconsidering. Colonel Hensley did not address me in front of the group. He did not make a public statement or offer immediate commentary. He waited. When the immediate debrief began, he spoke in measured terms about timing, coordination, and the effectiveness of leadership targeting in asymmetric containment scenarios. He referenced the removal of command nodes as a decisive factor. He never used my name. He did not need to. When the group dispersed to reset equipment and clear the training area, he stepped away from the others and walked toward me without audience. His posture was different than it had been 2 mornings earlier, not softer, clearer. And for the first time since he arrived at Redstone Range, he looked at me without doubt in his eyes. Colonel Hensley stopped a few feet from me, hands clasped behind his back. For a moment he said nothing. The range was clearing behind us. Opposing force members were laughing now, resetting gear, replaying the morning in their own way. The pressure that had defined the last 48 hours was dissolving into routine. You were right, he said finally. No preface, no formal framing. You identified the spine and removed it. I nodded once. He studied me for another second, then added, I underestimated your command posture. Not your shooting, not your plan. Your command posture. That was the part that mattered. He did not apologize publicly. He did not gather the officers and declare a lesson learned. That is not how men like him operate. Instead, during the formal debrief 2 hours later, he outlined the tactical effectiveness of precision leadership removal and siege containment. He emphasized patience under observation. He highlighted the value of measured overwatch when conventional perimeter response would have escalated risk. He described the approach as disciplined, not aggressive, and that description carried weight because it came from him. When the debrief ended and units began breaking down equipment, Sergeant Eli Warren clapped my shoulder once before heading toward the transport vehicles. You didn't blink, he said. That's the job. He smirked slightly. Most people blink. Later, as the Army elements prepared to depart, one of their squad leaders approached me, the same one who had whispered about letting one of our guys take Overwatch. He removed his helmet before speaking. Ma'am, he said, steady but direct. I was wrong this morning. There was no embarrassment in his tone, just clarity. You held discipline when we were leaning toward noise. That mattered. I nodded. We all held. He shook his head slightly. No, you did. He extended his hand. I shook it once, firm and brief. Respect in that moment did not feel triumphant. It felt quiet and earned. As the vehicles rolled out of Redstone Range, the compound returned to its normal training rhythm. Pine trees swayed lightly in the warm air. The valley that had felt constricted now looked ordinary again. I walked back to the berm alone. The dirt still carried impressions where Warren and I had shifted positions. Brass from blank rounds lay scattered in the grass below. The ridgelines were empty now, stripped of the tension that had defined them hours earlier. I stood there for a while without speaking. The truth about moments like that is simple. They do not erase doubt. They do not end the need to prove. They just reset the standard. I knew that the next time I stepped into a joint environment, someone would question again. Maybe not openly, maybe not with laughter, but skepticism has long memory. Being the only woman in a leadership role in naval special warfare meant constant evaluation beyond performance. Every misstep would be amplified, every hesitation examined. There is a cost to that. It is not dramatic. It is cumulative. But what I learned that morning was this: respect earned in silence lasts longer than applause delivered in noise. When Colonel Hensley walked the debrief floor later that afternoon, I saw him pause beside one of the Army captains and say quietly, "Study what she did. That's containment discipline." He did not realize I heard him. He did not need to. The sun had climbed fully above the Alabama hills by then, casting long lines of light across the training field. I reached up and removed my helmet, letting the air touch my face. The berm no longer felt like a firing position. It felt like ground reclaimed. I looked once more across the ridgeline where the fourth shot had ended it. No cheers, no spectacle, just quiet, and that was enough. It has been years since that morning at Redstone Range. I am no longer the young lieutenant trying to prove I belonged in the room. I stand on a different range now, stateside, instructing advanced marksmanship and small unit containment tactics to candidates who think they already understand pressure. Most of them do not. The pine trees are different here. The soil is lighter. The faces in front of me change every cycle. But sometimes, in the middle of a lecture on overwatch discipline, I see that same expression I saw on the command trailer back in 2016. Skepticism, curiosity, quiet challenge. A few months ago, a young female candidate stayed behind after dismissal. She was strong, sharp, carrying more tension in her shoulders than she realized. "How do you deal with it?" she asked. With what? The doubt, the looks, the comments that are not loud but still there. I thought about answering with something motivational, something polished. Instead, I told her the truth. "You don't fight it," I said. "You outlast it." She frowned slightly, waiting for something more complicated. "There will always be someone measuring you differently," I continued. "If you spend your energy trying to shut them up, you lose focus on the mission." She nodded slowly. "What if they're wrong about you? Then prove it in your discipline, not your volume." That morning in Alabama comes back to me sometimes without warning. Not the shots, not the map, not even the debrief. The laughter. And then the silence. People assume the goal is to silence the ones who doubt you. It is not. The goal is to protect the people depending on you. That day, 90 personnel were inside that perimeter. They did not need a dramatic display. They needed structure restored. They needed steadiness when pressure narrowed their thinking. The siege ended not because I was exceptional. It ended because I refused to let ego take the trigger. I waited when rushing would have been louder. I chose patience when proving something quickly would have been easier. Strength under scrutiny is not loud. It does not perform. It absorbs pressure and answers it with precision. I tell my students that real command is invisible most of the time. It is in the decision not to react emotionally. It is in the breath you control when everyone is watching. Years later, when I think about the fourth shot, I do not remember pride. I remember the silence that followed. Not the absence of sound, the absence of doubt. Across that valley, when the field commander raised the orange marker and the opposing force stalled, something shifted. It was not fear. It was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, once earned, does not fade. I still carry that morning with me, not as proof that I belonged, but as proof that steadiness matters more than noise. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.